Shalom. Please excuse me. I do have a nasty cough. I'm trying to get over a battle of pneumonia. Anyway, what I wanted to go ahead and cover in this message is anyone who is familiar with the Gospels, especially out of the book of John, knows about the story of the woman that was caught in the act of adultery. And she was brought by the townspeople, the scribes, the Pharisees. The whole shooting match was in town for that one. And it turns out that the whole thing perhaps was just a lie. They were obviously doing it to test Yeshua to see where they could trip him up in the law, but you're not going to trip up the living, walking Torah. You're not going to trip up the one who wrote the Torah. So, that being said, when he stood up and asked them, he said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." Well, there are several things wrong with this whole situation, which is why they were trying to trip him up, and it didn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover every aspect of why she was not stoned, why she lived, and why she went on her merry way. Now, I'm going to read I've got 5 different sections here that I'm going to be covering. The vast majority, 1 out of the Gospels, 1 out of the prophet Jeremiah, and 3 out of the Torah, which is going to bring all this together for you to understand why this happened the way it did. So, I'm going to be reading the New King James translation because doing some research, I found that, one of my go-to translations is the New American Standard. There are some different aspects that I like about the New King James and some of the other translations, which is why I'm going to go that route this particular night. Okay, so starting off in John chapter 8. Now early in the morning he came again to the temple, and all the people came to him. He sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded that such should be stoned. But what do you say?" This they said, testing him, that they might have something in which to accuse him. But Yeshua stooped down and wrote in the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. Now, I'm going to stop right there for a second. There have been a lot of people over the years that I've seen, and some people have figured it out. What was he actually writing with his finger in the dirt? And that we're going to cover that aspect of it. So when they continued to ask him, he raised himself up and said to them, "He who is without," pay very close attention to what he is saying. Pay attention to the words. "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." So he who is without sin among you, let him throw the stone at her first. There is only one person in this whole mess who would be without sin and would be allowed to throw the stone first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who had heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Yeshua was left alone with the woman, standing there in the midst. When Yeshua raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers of yours? Where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?" And the woman said, "No, no one, Lord." And Yeshua said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." So, you got to pay attention again to how the last part of this is worded. When he said, "He who is without sin among you cast the first stone," and he began to stoop and write on the ground again. And those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, being the oldest to the last, and Yeshua was left alone with her in the midst. And here's the question. Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She replied, "No one, Lord." And Yeshua said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." So those last few sentences is a big deal. So now we are going to jump into the Torah, into Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. And for those of you who have all these people out there, these preachers and pastors and everything, says the Torah no longer applies. Well, if you actually would read the Torah, you would understand why that happened the way it did with this woman. So Leviticus 20:10. Okay. The man who again, this is Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress, shall surely be put to death. So, going back to the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery, where was the man in that story? Where was the man that would have been just as guilty of adultery as she was? Strangely enough, he wasn't there. So if a woman or a man commits adultery, remember it takes two to tango here, that the adulterer, the man, and the adulteress, the woman, shall be put to death. Both of them shall be put to death, not one over the other, both of them. Now we're going to move to Deuteronomy 22. Yeah, we're in Deuteronomy 22:23. Okay, you know what? I take that back. I gotta correct that. I did this. I cut myself short here on this. Deuteronomy 22 verses 22 and 23. Okay. If a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die. The man that lay with the woman and the woman, so you shall put the evil out from Israel. If a young woman who is a virgin is betrothed to a husband, and a man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring both of them to the gate of the city, and you shall stone them to death with stones, the young woman because she did not cry out, and the man because he humbled his neighbor's wife. So again, it is talking about the man and the woman will both be stoned to death together. Going back to the story out of the book of John, there was no man present that was being accused along with the woman of committing adultery. Okay. Now we're going to move in to go back to Deuteronomy 17. Okay. So we're in Deuteronomy 17, 1 through 7. Remember back in the story when Yeshua said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Here's where that plays out. This is 7 verses long, so this is Deuteronomy 17, 1 through 7. Let's see here. "You shall not sacrifice to Yahweh your Elohim a bull or a sheep which has any blemish or defect, for it is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. If there is found among you within any of your gates, which Yahweh your Elohim gives you, a married woman, gives you a man or a woman who has been wicked in the sight of Yahweh your Elohim, in transgression of his covenant." And you have to remember at this time that they are still under the Sinai. They are under the Sinai covenant. That they are still fresh with the Ten Commandments and all the laws, statutes, and ordinances. All right. So, if there are a man and a woman found to do anything that transgresses the covenant, who has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, either the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it is told to you, and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. And if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination has been committed in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or that woman who has committed the wicked thing, and shall stone to death that man or that woman with stones. Okay, here's the last 2 verses is where the point is getting made. "Whoever is deserving of death shall be put to death on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. He shall not be put to death on the testimony of 1 witness. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of the people. So you shall put away the evil from among you." So when Yeshua said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," and then it continues reading in that, then they started feeling guilty by their conscience, and they dropped the stones and started walking away, one right after the other. Why? Because there was no witness. There wasn't even 1 witness, let alone 2 or 3 witnesses. So here, the woman that was brought in the act of adultery. So here's where the dilemma and the problems lied. There's when a woman or a man commits adultery, both the man and the woman are to be brought to be judged, and there was only the woman that was brought. There was no man. Next, that there must be two there must be 2 or 3 witnesses in order to condemn. And the witnesses are the first ones to cast the stones, then the rest of the people throw the stones hereafter. So, you lacked a man that she had committed adultery with. You lacked the witnesses, and therefore no stone could be cast to put this woman to death. This is Torah. Now, here is the creme de la creme. So for people asking, I've seen it, I'm sure some of you have, what was he writing in the dirt? Was he writing the Torah? Was he writing the 10 Commandments? No. He was writing the names of these men that had turned away from Yahweh, that were falsely accusing an innocent woman of committing adultery just so they could find a way to accuse Yeshua. And that is found in Jeremiah 17:13. O Yahweh, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be ashamed. Those who depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken Yahweh, the fountain of living waters. So, to sum everything up, we have a bunch of scribes and Pharisees bringing a woman by herself, wanting to find out Yeshua's reaction as to whether or not she should be stoned, because she had been caught in the act of adultery, and according to the law, she should be killed. And and there is no argument here that if she had been caught in the act of adultery, that according to the law, she should be stoned to death. But there was missing the man in which she supposedly committed the act of adultery with. So he was not there. There were no witnesses. You would need to have at minimum 2 witnesses. They couldn't produce 1. And of the people, the witnesses are the ones that are to cast the first stone. None of them cast the first stone because none of them were witnesses. So there were no witnesses present. Lastly, what was Yeshua writing in the dirt of the earth? Those who had departed from Yahweh shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken Yahweh, in which they had forsaken Yahweh. So hopefully, if this is something that's ever brewed on your mind, well, now you have an answer to that question. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a blessed night. Shalom.